Good morning and welcome to YWCA Minneapolis's last Coffee and Conversation of 2024. I am joined today by Suleiman Aden and Louise Covert, two members of our Racial Justice and Public Policy team. Welcome to you both. And I'm going to turn it over to them for a presentation, and we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Tia. Glad to be here.
Glad to be here as well. Thank you so much. It's bittersweet that this is our last one, but a topic that for myself and for Dr. Colbert that hits close to home, not just because it's a job for us, but because I believe for racial justice consultants or DE&I practitioners, whichever term you want to use, in order to be good at it in the work that we do, you have to live it. Right. And I think that's what the crux of what our conversation here is going to be here today. We have kind of an agenda that kind of guides you all as to how this conversation is going to go. The first is, why is racial justice important to the YWCA Minneapolis? What is it about racial justice that is important to the YWCA Minneapolis and its history? How has DE&I and racial justice, how does it operate beyond the walls? What is the web of racism, and how does it all intersect and intersect within each other? The impact of the murder of George Floyd in the city of Minneapolis, but beyond, and its impact in local and federal policies. And then what is the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion in racial justice jobs, and how that ties into policy and action. Without further ado, we can go into our first question. Why is racial justice important to the work here at YWCA Minneapolis? How did that land for you, Louise?
Well, I think about the many years that I've been a part of the YWCA, and in this role and other roles in my life through the decades. And I think about just the different ways that I've engaged in my experience working at the Y and seeing how people who are employees and then also people who have participated in the YWCA in different programming. It's very evident to me through those interactions that people come into that space and have that sense of the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, eliminating racism, empowering women, how those are key and central and at the forefront of every experience. That's a part of the intentionality, both as someone who works in the space and then someone who volunteers or participates in many different ways in the YWCA. So it's important in the sense of people having that communal or that collective solidarity belief, moving into and through experiences at the Y. And it's also important into the ways it spills over into the community through the programming and the experiences of members, participants, employees. I could just go on, donors, it's all there.
Something that you said that resonated with me was its mission, because it is a big mission. Even when you and I do scoping calls with prospective clients, we mentioned that like eliminating racism and especially that part
Yes.
is a big, tall aspect. I think something that's really unique about the YW, and more specific to YWCA in Minneapolis, is that we tether into community. I know for myself, the YWCA Midtown has been a part of my family since it's opened stores in the year 2000. Like I remember walking from Chicago and Lake to the Midtown location with my mom and my sisters, but also seeing that the members of that organization, whether it be as staff members or even beyond when they move on into different roles, continuing to live through the values of the organization. And I think it's a testament to the rich culture that the organization cultivates, and the type of people that they put into these positions, and especially for racial justice positions. There's something that our vice president often says is, until justice just is, and then from that turns into an entire event, right? And yes. I reflect on that and how it ties into why is racial justice, the work that we do, the consultancy, the partnerships that we have with clients across industry, why is it that we continue to operate the way that we do in a sea of different consultancy organizations in the state of Minnesota? I think it's because of the history, right? I think
Yes.
new ones come and go, but I think with YWCA Minneapolis, the history that it has in community, and then just the diversity that it has in fitness, in community engagement, and then having racial justice and diversity and inclusion like embedded in each one of those, I think shows like how it's longstanding.
Mhm. I agree. I think that when I think about how, for me, my experience with OYW, and like I said, through the decades has been the downtown, the uptown facility, and then the midtown facility. And now I think I learned from my my brother's children, my nieces and nephews, that the Midtown YWCA is a huge part of their high school experience, their lives. They spent a significant amount of time there. And I also think that as an employee, this is one of the places where I have felt most as though the community, the people that are part of the YWCA, represents more of a cross-section of society than some of the other organizations that I have had the privilege to work with. So I very much appreciate the intentionality with which the Y works to reflect the reality of our lived experiences in the world, in the society.
I love that. Diversity on purpose.
Yes.
Diversity on purpose. I love that.
And I think that intentionality is contagious in a very positive way. I think it would be challenging to be a part of this organization and not and somehow escape the importance of that and the richness and how we talk about diversity and inclusion work, providing opportunities for innovation. That's so apparent here. The more time I spend here, I see the ways that people with varied perspectives and lived experiences contribute and enrich the work that we do in all the different departments.
You know, on that point on innovation, I don't know if you're aware of this, Luis. Once upon a time, not once upon a time, but Minnesota is known nationally as a huge place for grassroots organizing.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Tell me more. Tell me more.
No, a lot of change. A lot of people think that, like, you know, whether it be like after the murder of George Floyd or with a lot of the other protests and movements that have happened, especially at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, that Minnesota became the center of the map. No, Minnesota, especially for our Native and Indigenous allies, brothers and sisters, this has been it, right? Minnesota has been it. Even when you go even further back during the civil rights movement, it wasn't just in the South. Like the North had a lot of work happening here too. And the reason I mentioned all that in relation to what the YWCA, and this is just what I the little digging that I did, is that there were members of the YWCA, members as in like they were paying members of the YWCA, were part of some of these movements, right? And that the YWCA themselves, and I think why racial justice, going back to this question, why it's important that we have these different departments and these different aspects of what makes the YWCA beyond a gym. It's because racial justice is within all of them, right? Even the how they approach the quote unquote challenged youth, right? Like it's not going to be, hey, you're going to be punished for not going to school or for getting in trouble with the law. No, it's like you're going to be nurtured. You're going to be cared at a level that is, again, going back to the core values of what the YWCA is. I just find it really interesting from its connection to race, its connection to the grassroots organizing movement historically and continuously, to how it continues into DE&I in the workplace, ECE with children, but also when it comes to how we're going to approach students that may be having trouble in school. It's like it's so incredibly well encompassing.
And I'm gonna springboard off of what you said a little bit too, because when you talk about it being expansive, and I think about the YWCA is, yes, it's the Twin Cities, it's the metro area, and it's also in other parts of the states as well. So the YWCA, its mission and outreach, its commitment to racial justice extends beyond the Twin Cities, the metro area, to other parts of the state. And of course, nationally as well. I'm thinking locally about our experience as race equity consultants too. One of the other things that I'm thinking of is just the different resources, the different programming that was available through the YWCA in the spirit of racial justice, and also community engagement and support through the pandemic. And I think that it's important for me to recognize that in times of strife, in times of hardship, we can come together sometimes across those areas of challenge and difficulty in our humanity. And because those times of strife and hardship are not in the forefront of my mind necessarily, that does not mean that those concerns, those challenges, those difficulties are not still very much a part of everyday life experience for people. And when I remember that, it's important for me to remember that racial justice is important work for every day of my life, of every day of our lives.
Emphasis on that hour, right? It's for everyone. It's for everyone.
Yes.
Inclusivity and belonging isn't just for some, it's for all.
It's
I
for
love
all
that.
of us.
It's for-
Yes.
You know, when I had seen this image, I was thinking of sometimes some of the backlash, not backlash, but some of the comments that we receive or other practitioners may receive for why are we pushing this so far? Like, why are we pushing DE&I in the workplace so far? And I think it's just for that. It's for a better tomorrow, right?
Yes.
It isn't equitable. I think everyone would agree that everyone wants to live and work in an equitable and fair environment or our society, right? But in order to achieve that, just like how eliminating racism and empowering is this huge goal that YWCA continues to tether itself into, saying like we are going to fight for this, right? This is what it is, and we're going to embed it into all the work that we do to see it through. Same thing when it comes to this. Like, if we want to see a better tomorrow, we have to as practitioners, as consultants here, that it isn't just the work that we do within the walls of the YWCA Minneapolis, but it's how we show up and live outside, right? The values that we have, you know, even the trainings that we give, whether it be difficult conversations or, you know, teaching about race and racism and intersectionality and the history of white privilege and white supremacy culture, all of that needs to be practiced outside with us first and foremost, right? And those within our proximity.
Yes, and I appreciate that. That's a touchstone for me. So in a way, the WISE mission, it has been a touchstone for me in my professional life, and also when I leave work, or if I'm working virtually, when I leave a space where I am in a work mindset, it's something that does and is a part of a commitment to live that disposition, that, and also in action, and think about how am I showing up in the world every day in ways that that support an anti-racist mindset. And the why, and just affiliation with the YWCA brings that back to the forefront of my mind on a daily basis in a very important way. And I appreciate it.
You know, it also reminds me of like what is the leading thing that we leave with the folks, whether it be clients or participants in our space, right? Like, after we finish work with them, we finished our series, like our quote unquote working relationship is done. It's, you know, we hope that we leave them in a position that we are confident that they will be able to use the tools consistently, successfully, right? That they will be able to continue to work, because if it's We just come and do it. It's a Band-Aid, right? And then that Band-Aid, like any other band or sealant, will start to peel away and tear, right?
Mhm.
But if it's, hey, I got the tool to fix that tear when it happens, because it will happen. That's what life is. I know that I prepared them, we prepared them to continue the work ongoing. Just like if someone was was teaching someone how to build a house, and I taught you all aspects of contracting, and I don't know how to build a house. I'm just throwing terms that I've heard out
It
there.
works. It works.
All aspects of building a house, and you're my protege, and I leave you knowing that you will be able to maintain this house. That's what that trust is, and I think the work that we do is built on trust, right? And I think that's what that tie between racial justice work and grassroots organizing work. It's if you're gonna do this, you have to be all in, right? Because the work that we do touches the lives of, especially when you and I are doing it as of recent, like about
Yes.
over 100 people at a time, right? At any given time, right? So with each one of those, knowing that these people are coming at either end of the continuum or spectrum when it comes to their knowledge or expertise or experience with racial justice or diversity, equity, inclusion, whether in their lives in the workplace, but saying like, hey, like you are no longer going to be just a mere participant in this work. You're going to be active in this work if you value this work, and that's under the assumption that everyone wants to live and work in an equitable and fair workplace.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I believe that's true. And I guess that's a fundamental belief of mine, is that I do believe that that people do want to support and live in an equitable society. And I think that we are, as you mentioned, in different places in terms of our growth journey, and having access to learning opportunities
Mm.
where in community with other people, people that perhaps we work with, people who perhaps we come together with under the umbrella of another community, having the opportunity to do that kind of learning together. And as you said, then take what we learn in those spaces, or bring in what we have experienced in our lives and consider them.
Mhm.
Consider that information in those spaces, and obtain tools and perspectives that we can then take out into our lived experience, as you said, and apply. And also know that it's a lifelong journey, that it's not something that I'm expected to attain and then move on, that it's
Mm.
something that that I can feel grateful for the opportunity to get up every day and start over again with my learning and growth.
Yeah, and on that point, it's lifelong, right? That
Mhm.
it's there's gonna be ebbs and flows, and we know that what life is. Life happens. People get sick. People
Mhm.
get like things happen in their lives that create what we perceive as obstacles. Because I say what we perceive, because what may be an obstacle for one person may be something else for another.
Yes.
But it's these tools that we have in this toolbox of ours. These tools that we have on this arsenal of ours. Those that we've sharpened over the years.
Mm.
Are we confident in ourselves that we will know how to use them when the time comes, right? When we talk about, when we give our trainings to white folks, and we talk about how not just white folks, but like we're directing a specific message to folks of the dominant culture, and in this context, in the United States, it is white folk.
Yes.
It's when you say, hey, like, let's fight against white silence, because that silence that you have says more, right? It's saying a lot more than what you think that you not saying anything means. How can you counteract that, or any of these other, or when we talk about like increasing one's self-awareness, all these tools that we have, how are we going to use them? Not only in the workplace, and I keep bringing it back to workplace, because really it kind of transitions to our next slide here, but really ever since after the pandemic, there really hasn't been a me hat and a work hat. We're wearing them both at the same time. Once upon a time, there was a time where you could leave your life at home, and then you have your work self, and they're completely separate. But it's not the case anymore, especially in the work that you and I do, right? And I think that brings us
That's true.
into this web of racism.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I I love how you and I had this conversation, like going into it yesterday, and then how even for the blogs, and kind of like a little plug, why do you say Minneapolis? Like we have monthly blogs that come out that are touching on the different elements of the web of racism. So be on the lookout for those. But I thought that, Luis, I started off with you, if you don't mind, and then on what about this stands the most out to you? I know for myself, something that comes up for me is education. Like both of us as educators, you in the space a lot longer than me. I think of, first and foremost, like growing up in the South Side of Minneapolis, knowing that my quality of education had a direct impact in policies, state and federal, in where I lived, right? And then just going, 20 minutes, up the freeway, or 25 minutes up the freeway, like we were talking about in the Wayzata school district, and it's night and day, the experiences of those students. And as we know that how each one of these literally intersect or influence each one another, how your quality of health has an impact of it has an impact on your quality of education.
Absolutely.
It's truly remarkable.
Yes, I think as we look at this, this represents the moving from the interpersonal experience of racism to the systemic experience of racism, and how that these different pillars of our society, whether we're talking about labor market, healthcare, education, media, criminal justice, housing, transportation was mentioned the other day too as a part of this. All of these institutions have the capacity and are responsible in different ways for reproducing racial inequities in our society. And they do affect one another. So there's a ripple effect, if you will. So for example, as Suleiman was saying, education affects my ability to have access to opportunities in the labor market. Housing, where I live, has an impact on what kind of transportation options I have. Do I live in a high opportunity neighborhood? A high opportunity neighborhood being a neighborhood where I have access to transportation, access to quality education, access to healthcare, access to jobs and parks and recreation and opportunities. So if I am living in a society where, for example, redlining is a reality and was a part of how communities were segregated. Some of the ways that highway planning occurred in our society completely destroyed thriving minoritized communities, African-American communities in both St. Paul and Minneapolis. And the destruction of those neighborhoods really ripped apart a community, reinforced and reproduced inequities along lines of race. We see that the media repeatedly supports certain images or representations of people, and how people are racialized by the media. It has a huge impact in how people internalize stereotypes or misrepresentations. And so we can talk about these different areas in our life, and we all consume or participate in housing, labor market, healthcare, education. I want to pause and look at healthcare a minute too, because if I'm not able to get access to good healthcare, how can I participate fully in my education, or participate fully in my work experience, afford or even consider, perhaps what kind of housing might be available to me if I'm limited in those areas. So all of these different important and essential areas of need in our system are ways that racism is systemically reproduced in our daily lives. So many of the interpersonal experiences that we have connections, direct connections, if we work back through them, to systemic inequities along racial lines. And I think that it's extremely important for us to recognize that this web of racism is systemic, and it is again a significant reason why racial justice work is essential in our society today. So Suleiman, that was a long,
And no, it's okay.
long offering there.
No, I appreciate it. And I think what I want to do is like take a step back and, you know, because we mentioned a term, but meaning racism. I think we explained the web itself, but what racism, what is racism, and how we come to define it here at the YWCA Minneapolis, and which I've then gone to own in when I leave the walls of the YWCA Minneapolis and I go and teach, or whether it be my own family or the folks in my struggle, as to what racism actually is. It's two things that come together that then result in racism. The first is social and institutional power. And what that means is like who has the access to resources and participation in society, right? And that second part is racial prejudice. And those are the beliefs, the attitudes, and the actions based on race-based stereotypes. So when you have when you have racial prejudice, those beliefs, those attitudes based on race-based stereotypes, and then you have power, those things together create racism, and then thus begin how it's experienced within these systems. Now, even in our sessions, we talk about how we have this figure of a house. And if you can imagine, there's a house and you can look into it and there's 9 rooms in this house, and with every room is titled or labeled with each of the 9 protected identity classes in these United States. And to enter this house, there's only one way in, one way out, and it's through the race door. And the reason being is that it's in this country, in order to have an honest conversation and how any one of us experience identities in this country, we have to have an honest conversation about race and how it influences how any one of us experience any one of those identities. Like when you mentioned healthcare, my wife, a Black woman who gave birth to our daughter almost 3 years ago, I saw firsthand racism in healthcare, right? When they were telling her, when she was telling them, hey, I'm in pain. I need more medication. I need more medicine. I'm in pain. They're like, no, you have enough, right? And it wasn't until me, a person in my male body, stepping up and saying, hey, listen, she's actually in pain. And it took me multiple times in order for them to listen. And then we ended up finding out that they didn't actually administer the medication correctly, right? So when we talk about how Black women are harmed at the hands of those who have taken an oath to heal them, this is what we mean, like racism in healthcare, right? And how these, and we see this in medical textbooks, right? And it may not be as taught anymore, but the belief is still there that Black women in some way, shape, or form have some sort of higher pain tolerance than other women or other people, right? Mm-hmm. Again, comes to these beliefs, and this is what racial prejudice is, right? Race-based stereotypes based on these beliefs or attitudes. It's like caked into everything, right?
Yes. And the importance of looking at those inequities is something that is important for all of us, especially those of us committed, all of us who are committed to equities in our society, race-based equities. And then, as Suleiman was saying, we need to look at race first, and then move in. We have the opportunity, once we explore that and recognize the inequities, the social inequities that are racialized in our society, we can then take a step and look at other marginalized communities as well. But it is important, first of all, in our society to look at how we're racialized in our society and what kinds of opportunities and access is available to me as I'm racialized as a white woman, and in what ways do I experience privilege in this society, and to be mindful of that as I walk through the world. Extremely important. Irrespective of my socioeconomic background, my whiteness provides me with significant privilege in my day-to-day life.
You and I were just given a training earlier at the beginning of this week to a majority white group, right? When we talk about privilege, we gave that, that precursor that like, hey, like we are not saying that the things that you should be guilty of the things that you have in life or the things that you've received in life. Rather, just being aware that your race played a role in the things that you have in life, you as an individual and also historically as a group.
Yes. Yes. And, from my, in growing up in Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, in my family, my parents had very little money and hadn't graduated from high school. However, they intentionally purchased a house in a neighborhood where their children would have access to good school, what they saw as good schools and
Mhm.
parks and things like that. And yes, they were house poor and it was difficult. And at the same time, we still continue to experience a great deal of privilege, given our whiteness in that community. And it was a community, I will say that I want to also add that that's a community where at that time, when my parents purchased the house, if a Black family would not have been allowed to purchase a home in that community.
Before we move on, something that just reminded me of like a conversation you and I had yesterday about like even safety, this idea of safety,
Mhm.
right? Like
Oh,
how-
yes.
yeah, how like you have folks in your space who ask you living in the South Side, like, hey, is it safe there? And you're like, yeah, I feel safe there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then a colleague of ours saying that like, hey, that idea or that feeling of safeness may also come with privilege. Like I know that I
Yes.
can walk through these streets knowing that I don't have to worry. Whereas myself or the colleague that we were talking about saying like, you know what, like I actually have to keep my head on a swivel when
Yes.
I'm walking these streets, you know?
Yes. And I appreciate those conversations because I appreciate someone saying, Louise, yes, you're living in the city, you're here, and you lament that that there's this white flight from the city, and at the same time, I do have the confidence that I can walk down the street and feel fairly safe, and that's part of my privilege, and learning more about that, having people that are willing to help me learn about that. Not that that's an expectation because that's my own learning, but I'm grateful for people who help me notice more of the things that I hope to unlearn.
And I think that's what self-awareness work is, right? That we notice, once we do notice the changes that we make internally within ourselves, right?
Mm.
Um,
Yes.
we're reaching almost a month after the murder of George Floyd, and we'd be remiss without mentioning the impact that his murder and death had on racial justice and DEI efforts in the state of Minnesota and beyond.
Yeah.
You know, I remember for myself, like being in those streets, organizing, and not just protests, but actually organizing efforts. And she could also seeing the call to action other organizations had after this. Now, I'm not going to theorize or assume why now, but I think it's like, better late than never, right? Because that this then created this like kind of like domino effect of organizations applying for funding that they may not have otherwise applied to, creating positions that they wouldn't otherwise have had positions for, and did work that organization had not done before, right? Thus changing how, if we're looking at the workplace level, the experience of especially inclusivity and belonging of their employees of color in that space, but also the work that was happening externally in community.
Yeah, I remember I remember this event. So I will never forget it. And going out the following days and walking through the neighborhoods and seeing people come together and working on immediately trying to heal and also understand. I think that it was, we came together, and again, coming back to, why is racial justice important? To ensure that things like this don't happen. And we know that they still are happening. And so how can we continue to do this work in ways and believe that this is the work that will diminish or eliminate these kinds of tragic events?
I think it goes back to like we were mentioning during the web of racism, that we can't talk about any one of these, like how Black folk are portrayed in the media, without talking about how race and racism plays in how Black men or Black folk are portrayed in the media, right?
Yes.
And it's without going through each one of these. And that's when we give these trainings, we do them developmentally on purpose, right? When we do them in community and with organizations, that you are going to learn these foundational concepts before you can get work that's going to put you in a position to transform your workplace or transform your community. That you have to get that grounding first. Going back to what you said, that if we don't want certain things to happen again, we cannot be bystanders anymore. We can't have white silence anymore, right? We need to be active participants in this work, whether it be in community or in the workplace. And I think it brings us to this question of the importance of the roles that we have and their future, right? We had a conversation, I think it was Friday, if not Monday, on even the name changes that we're seeing, right? Away from diversity and inclusion coordinator or manager or consultant, wellness, or the culture and wellness.
Yes, or leadership, and the ways that people who have worked in racial justice and diversity, equity, inclusion are looking for opportunities to embed this very important leadership work and justice work in different under different umbrellas or headings. And go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say, because we see it sometimes, right? When the
Yes.
the
Yes.
pushback that we receive, like, oh, what's the importance of this? Or like even when they hear certain topics or trainings, it's like, why am I doing this? But like even seeing the positive reception of slight name changes and how it has on folks more willingness to do the work, right? I see that as a plus. Right, but something that I also see, and we can't move on without naming this, is the de-investment, just like how they invested in 2020, right? But the de-investment that we're seeing in DE&I roles and jobs within organizations, right? And what message is that sending?
Yes, and recognizing that message, I think here's where critical thinking really helps us to exactly ask those questions, Suleiman. What is happening and why? What are the factors that are contributing to that perceived de-investment in diversity, equity, inclusion work, or the need to frame it differently in order to maintain or create openness to the importance of it, to maintain that openness that we had achieved earlier.
It reminds me of so I in undergrad, like I had studied a few degrees, but one of them was in HR. And being in HR school, something that I was taught was oftentimes DE&I and HR are seen as synonymous. Sometimes they're housed in the same department, right? But that doesn't mean that a person in HR may be well equipped to do racial justice or DE&I work, right? So the importance of having organizations invest, whether it be in their HR leaders or with folks within their organization, whether it be coordinators, consultants, managers, with whatever title that they want to give them in that role, in that space of racial justice and diversity, equity, inclusion. And measuring that up with what are the goals that you all have as an organization? If it's your values and goals, how do they match up with your stance on creating an anti-racist society or anti-racist workplace? And we talk about this all the time, right? Like with things that you as an organization can do tangibly in the short term or long term to achieve those goals that are already in your mission, that are already in your value statement, right? But that it's going to take some repositioning and again, reinvestment in that work. And it could be as simple as, like there are people in this organization that are saying that they want to do the work. Give them the space to do the work, right? Affinity groups, ERGs, and not having them just be placeholders, but picking and selecting, senior leadership members who would be sponsors to these folks to actually achieve the across and wide organizational change that you're seeking. I could go on. I could go on and on about this, especially just seeing the changes that we're seeing even in our backyard, in the city of Minneapolis. And I think it brings us into civic engagement. I I think once an organizer, always an organizer, and I continue to organize within the city of Minneapolis. The important, especially during an election year, and especially getting folks involved at their local level, right? That DE&I and racial justice show up in policies, but we may not think that it's in there just because, hey, like, how does racial justice or DE&I show up in policies? No, we see it at the national level, right? When we see it in the state of Texas and the state of Florida saying, you know what, we are going to do away with DE&I and racial justice jobs. We are going to do away with, critical race theory. We're going to do away with, certain schools saying, you know what, we're not going to have African American history. We're not going to have African American history. We're just going to have U.S. history. What message is that sending? These are policies, and again, this is at a state level, but at the local level, at the county level, like getting involved in your city council, even just showing up and listening what these folks are saying, because the things that are put on those dockets have a huge impact on your quality of life. Now, if we go back to what we were saying before of, am I going to be an active participant and just let things happen around me? Or am I going to be someone who, you know what, I care about change, right?
Mhm.
I want to be a part of that change. And I know what my capacity is in being a part of that change. And a part of that just maybe showing up physically, right? And I think if the death of and murder of George Floyd or any one of the names that we see on that flower there mean anything, I think we cannot afford to not show up at the very least, right?
Yes. And if I don't know what kinds of questions to ask, think about the web of racism. What are the policies that are being put forth about housing, about healthcare?
Mhm.
Where are our representatives on issues related to, excuse me, transportation?
Mhm.
Or what are some of the things that are being discussed about education on the platforms? So thinking about those and then just listening to whether or not there is an awareness or a focus or an emphasis on those areas that have so much of an impact on whether we live in an equitable or an inequitable society.
I love it. And when we're talking about housing, something that came up for me is within my own community, the Somali community, what we're seeing is quote unquote Somali flight, right? We heard of white flight before, but we're seeing Somali flight where they're leaving the inner city and they're going into the far stretches of the first ring and second ring, sometimes even third ring suburbs. And of the grassroots organizers in our community, what we're trying to tell them is, hey, listen, what you buying a home, you purchasing a home, you having that buying power, that wealth that you've accumulated, you taking it into predominantly white communities has an impact. You're like, what impact does it mean? I mean, like the schools that you bring them back to, do you remember the quality of education or the schools or the schooling that your children that had in the city? Oh yeah. Do you know that you purchasing a home, right, and the value of the home in proximity of those schools, what it would do to the quality of education of those students in that school? Oh, I had no idea. I just want to get my kids into a better schools. But it's like having that like long-term thinking, right? But having that investment, right? People not understand like this type of positioning is organizing and it's tied with civic engagement, right?
Yes.
So I know that the training that we give, even though it's mostly white folk that attend them, we are speaking to everybody, right? And going back to before, like as racial justice, consultants and managers, and that the work that we do inside the office should be continuing outside the office. Why? Because it's the values that are instilled to us by Shelley, by Tony, by Angela, by the powers that be at the YWCA Minneapolis. I say like when we were hired and we were bought into this organization, the assumption was we bought into these values, we bought into this mission, and we're going to continue it beyond here.
Yes.
I think now it brings us into the Q&A portion.
Wow, thank you. I just want to share like something that I'm taking away right now, and it's that word safety, and particularly safety as it relates to that web of racism, because I think something that ties all those pieces together, education, healthcare, criminal justice, media, labor, etc., has a direct impact on who gets to feel safe and also the safety of the actual conditions of your work, of your healthcare, your housing, et cetera, et cetera. So safety is something I'll be thinking a lot about at the end of this call. So thank you for that piece. I also wrote down diversity on purpose.
Mhm. Yes.
So thank you for these takeaways. I feel like a lot of the questions I have been answered, but I'd like to start with what advice would you all give to org leaders about DEI in the workplace?
Hmm. I think for me, it's listen to and consider whether or not decisions about restructuring or things are continuing to either directly or indirectly support racial justice work within the organization. I think that there is a narrative out there, definitely, and we're aware of it, that's a movement away from DE&I and racial justice work. And I think that it can be very nuanced. So I think it's important to think through messaging and recommendations and ask, what is being left behind, before decisions are made, and what is, continuing to be championed in organizations, and with an awareness that this is an important piece that will continue to, as long as we focus on racial justice and diversity, equity, inclusion work, it enriches the work space experience and people's lives beyond that. And I'm going to turn it over to Suleiman with that.
No, that was great. I think something that comes up for me is something that I said earlier, the values that you have and how it relates to diversity and inclusion. How does it show up in every aspect of your organizational culture from the very beginning? And I say very beginning, meaning like, where are you posting your job postings? Right. Like, and how has that then resulted in the type of people that you have? So going back to diversity on purpose, and what we mean by that is, are you being purposeful in the types of folks, in the differences that make a difference being at your organization? Now, we're not saying, single out a specific race or specific type of person, but it's like, how are you being equitable and making your postings accessible? Something else that I think of is when it comes to the policies that you write, myself and Luis, we get in equity audits and document reviews for organizations all the time. The language that you put, the words that you use in those policy languages have a huge impact on a diverse array of people, right? We had a conversation last week, Luis, on how an organization had put the language in their policy with regards to taking time off for holidays if it was a genuinely held belief. It's like, what do you mean genuinely held belief, right? For a person who may not be as practicing, or who comes from a non-dominant religion, it's like, are you saying that the religion that I follow, that I practice, may not be as dominant, or are you perceiving how I may show up in the identity that I hold in said faith in question, right? So, being really purposeful in the language that you write in these policies, to how you create these spaces for all of your employees across lines of difference, to engage with different aspects of racial justice. Remember, it's racial justice for all, right? And then how purposeful are those spaces? Are they productive, right? And then are there leadership within the organization that are going between them to actually affect the change? There's a saying by a researcher here in Minnesota, Dr. Brittany Lewis, who says, oftentimes when it came to community-based research work, we were bringing community to the table. No, now we got to bring the table to community. And I think that's what org leaders need to do. If you want change to happen at the organizational level, you need to go to your employees across lines of difference to make the change that you already want to see happen.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to the top because I think this question is related, which is, why focus on racial justice in the workplace?
I think for me, I'll start with this one. And kind of going back to what I said earlier, that once upon a time we could have taken, there was two distinct parts of who we are. There was a work Suleiman and there was a home Suleiman. But now the work Suleiman and the home Suleiman, especially in the era of the hybrid work, has come so much. And I think because of what we've seen, not just with the murder of George Floyd, but and with any one of the names that on that flower there, how each one of them had an impact and a ripple effect on how any especially for Black folk and folks of color in the workplace, how they experience work. Like I distinctly remember how that when with the death of Philando Castile and what it did to me and what it did to them to my Black colleagues and how we showed up mentally that summer into work. Like I remember it, right? And I was a teacher in that time, so like I remember that so much, and I remember the murder of George Floyd and having to go to work that following week, what it did to me and what it did to my employees of color, and then also what it started doing to workplaces across the country. And I think it was just like that wake up call, like this. I think for folks, it's we can't just go through with the status quo anymore. We can't just have one and done trainings anymore. We can't just have band-aid operations anymore. If we want to create a just and equitable society for all, a workplace where all folks feel like they can show up authentically. And I think that's something that we say, but in practice, it means so much different. Like we know this as folks of color, we are already coming to the workplace with a shield, right? And now when asked to show up authentically, hey, you can show up how you want to show up. It's, can I really? Right. And we look and we look around to see like, is this value being practiced anywhere else? And if it is, it's who is actually practicing it, which groups of folks are able to show up how they are and which aren't. And I think something as small as that, not small, but something like that, for an example, shows like the need for us to continue doing and to continue to have racial justice workshops and trainings, and having them be developmental on purpose. That you're going to go through foundational concepts. You're going to learn. You're going to relearn if you think you've already gone through it 1, 2, 3 times. 1, 2, 3 times doesn't mean that you're an expert. Even for us as consultants and as practitioners, we are always going through relearnings and more learnings to kind of strengthen our understanding of these things. And then from that, you can then go into the transformational work.
I want to build off of what Suleiman said and talk about the importance of being able to show up as one's authentic self. I think that just as we looked at the house and that the first door we'd go through is race, and we need to be able to have honest conversations about race and racial inequities first and foremost, and then those other marginalized groups, we have the language, we have the ability to talk about those inequities as well. So it provides a benefit to marginalized groups, in addition to how people are marginalized by race, to have conversations about how people have or have not been able to show up. For me, this is the first workplace where I've really been able to show up authentically in my entire career. And I'm well into my career, so that's been really important to me to be able to talk about my wife, and not feel very like there's very much a need in order to be safe to compartmentalize my life, and have my home life and my work life, to be able to come to work on Monday, and when people ask me how my weekend is, to be able to talk about what my wife and I did. And have people and feel affirmed in who I am. So I think that without having racial equity work happening, those other opportunities to explore different areas of difference would be equally diminished, if not absent too.
I want to go back to the question of civic engagement and what importance civic engagement has regarding DEI and racial justice. Can you speak more to that?
I always come back to organizing. I come from an organizing background that's political, but even doing so, and with the understanding that it will have it can and will have an impact on how any one of us experience these policies, whether it be at our home life and our work life. And I know that for some folks, it's, I'm going to show up and I'm going to vote at like big elections like the presidential election that we're going to have, especially when we have huge things on the docket or were on the docket before. Like for example, Roe v. Wade. But like even I remember questions that are laid out when it comes to how much funding a school should receive, right? And they sneak them in there. But if we as individuals, as just citizens of a state, are not invested and engaged in the ongoings of politics at our state, just at the local level, I think so many things, and I think that's what the powers that be. I think that's what they want, right? I think they want us to just show up for the big things, and that they will go. I urge folks to go and just see how many people show up at city council hearings, especially in the city. Not many people come, right, regularly. So like when things are being pushed, you don't have a lot. I think now things have changed. I think now you have a lot more pressure, a lot more presence in those spaces. Again, due to organizing, because people are like, no, we are not going to have this done. We are going to show up. We're going to listen. If you're not going to listen to this, we're going to make you listen. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that if we want that, if going back to this picture, what is it? This, right? You have to fight today for a better tomorrow. You have to put in the work today. And I think the time of being complacent and just being passive in how in our politics, especially as practitioners, and I'm speaking just to the folks that do this work and value this work, we have to reassess where our priorities lie if we want that better tomorrow. And who's that better tomorrow for whom? It's for all, right? And it's lifelong work. If we value this work, it's lifelong work. And I think if it's not just at that the big elections that are going to be happening in November. They continue to happen even in local city council ones.
I'm going to echo, excuse me, echo Suleiman's words there, and just underscore the importance of becoming engaged in local neighborhood politics, neighborhood organizations, also attending city council meetings, asking those questions about candidates in relation to the elements of the web of racism and what we're hearing, what we're seeing, paying attention to what we hear, and thinking about that when we go mindfully take steps to support candidates and be involved in our communities.
Thank you. I have one more question, which is, and you've touched on this a little, but what are some action steps for anyone listening to this call with regard to DEI?
Oh, that's a good one. I think something that we always tell the folks at within our trainings, Louise, that it's first and foremost, it's where are you getting your information from?
Yeah.
We know that the powers that be at Google, right? It's algorithm based, right? So if you're searching for certain things are gonna show up for you to engage with, right? When it comes to your top searches, and as we call confirmation bias, right? If you're going to like, where are you getting it? Where are you getting your information that confirm the biases that we all have already? So it's seeking out diverse media sources. Being well read. I think something that we were just giving this training, or I was just giving this training as a makeup on race and racism yesterday to an organization. And it's something that I continue to push for folks is to watch the documentary 13th on Netflix, to listen to the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones, and anywhere that you find podcasts. I'm a podcast listener. I listen to podcasts like when I'm cleaning, when I'm cooking, when I'm when I'm driving to work all the time. So if you can't just sit down for large segment interviews, being able to just like listen as you're going about your day is great. And then reading Beverly Daniel Tatum's Why Are the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria. I think these are just like a few examples, just to kickstart, if not to expand the knowledge or the reading that you're already doing. I think the next is like, if you are a person who works in an organization that does not have employee resource groups, does not have affinity groups, does not have a DEI council of sorts, like be the one who starts one. It doesn't matter where you are on that, continuum of lines, on that line of difference. Start one, right? Find allies within your workplace to actually start one. And then find and advocate on behalf of yourself with a leadership member within your organization to be the sponsor, right? Again, fight today, like do the work today to see the change that you want to see in the workplace. I think all of us there and know that I think that we want to see change in the places that we work. And it goes back, like, are we going to just come in and, get a check? And now here's the thing, money's important. And if that's the reason you come into work, I will not, come at you. However, if we value this work, you need to go beyond that. And anything by beyond that, I mean, you have to show up and do the work. That's what I would say.
Yes, totally agree about the podcast. I'm a big through line listener throughout the day.
Oh, same.
Before we, I want to open it up for questions to anyone listening. I do want to, while we're still on the call, introduce Tony Tolliver. He is the interim VP of Racial Justice and Public Policy, and I notice he is here. So I just wanted to say welcome, and if you have any remarks, feel free to jump in. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, you're not putting me on the spot. Thank you. I appreciate being here. I love the conversation. And the one thing I'll add to what was just spoken about with action is use that web of racism. Find a place where you have expertise and comfort and go in and be a difference in that space. For example, if you're a person who knows a lot about housing, perhaps you can look at some of the root causes of racism within the housing markets within Minnesota or Minneapolis or St. Paul and volunteer your time to help people learn more about that. If you're a person who has workforce knowledge, perhaps you can help by helping folks get better prepared for interviews so that they have opportunities. When they have opportunities, they can knock it out of the park, to use a baseball cliche.
Yes.
Go places where you're comfortable or curious at first and make your difference using the superpowers that you have.
Starting where you are. That's
Right.
excellent advice. Thank you. Well, thank you to Louise, Suleiman, our captioner, and to Tony for joining us on this call. Thank you to anyone who is listening, anyone who's watching the replay on YouTube. So glad you could join us. Take care and stay tuned for more from YWCA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye for now.